Hello friends, Mark Johnson here. Welcome back to my series on BO development. This session is going to cover BO mappings and we will conclude and finish up the BO development before we move on to our next series. So we are doing this in TRIRIGA 11.1 4.1 as usual. So I'm going to go ahead and get myself logged in. We're going to need to go into the data modeler and navigate to our business object. So let's get to the data modeler, and CST Sports is our module, and CST Sports is our BO. So to get to the BO mapping, I need to go to the Tools menu and then select BO mapping. So the BO mapping is very important. We have to set the BO mapping, at least some of the BO mapping, in order to be able to publish the business object. Without it, we cannot publish. So the BO mapping is actually made up of a few different things. So the first part we have here is the name. So this is the published name. The term published name and BO mapping tend to get used synonymously, but it's not actually correct or proper to do because the BO mapping is all of these settings. So we've got the published name, we've got the cost quantity and image, right? And these go with the classification rollups. Then there's the conversion group and the exchange date. These two fields go with currency conversion. And then the last part is all about the dealing with the control number. So you can see it's a lot more than just the published name, which is just one little part of the overall BO mapping. So just be aware when you're asked what is BO mapping. You may want to clarify the questioner and see really if they're just trying to get to the published name, or you can indicate that setting the published name is one of the things that you can do there. But there are others. Now, the most common things that you'll do are setting the published name and then setting the control number information. These other ones I've not used in 13 years of TRIRIGA development, but this will really be dictated based off of the type of projects that you're working on, the customers you're working with. For instance, I've only ever worked with one customer that did currency conversions. It was the world's largest retailer, so I don't have a lot of experience in that area of dealing with and working with some of these fields. But that's one of the great things about TRIRIGA is that it you constantly get to do new things and learn new things. So even here after 13 years, right, there's still some areas of the system I didn't know what these did. I had to spend time researching them so that I can learn them. And it's not just as straightforward as just go to the user guide. Yes, you can find these settings in the user guide. However, the cost, quantity, and image section, the application builder guide, doesn't really talk about them much. It you end up actually having to go to the application builder guide, the calculations, in order to find out what these settings do, and then the conversion group and exchange date that's under the money section in the builder guide. So there isn't just one section in the guide to say, okay, I can go learn all about the BO mappings here and find all the problems. Right, you're going to have to go searching around to get all that information. It's one of the drawbacks, in my opinion, of the guides. I'm not a big fan of the way it's presented, although I certainly understand why it is. There's so much information and so many much overlap, right? And you don't want to have to put the same material over and over and over, because just think of the nightmare if there's a change to the material, you have to go and change it in all those places rather than just one place. So totally get and understand why they do that. So let's talk about these things in basically in the order in which you're going to use them, or the things that you're going to use most frequently here in the BO mapping. So the first part, the published name, which is this name here, right? You see we've got a find action. And so what the published name does for us is it allows us to identify the field or the combination of fields that define a record as being unique, right? Because you don't want to have duplicate entries in your table, right, where all the information is the same. So in TRIRIGA, right, the platform handles the database, right? The creation of the tables and the primary keys and the secondary keys and all that for you. But you still do have to tell it, okay, this is what defines a record as being unique. So I'm going to just go ahead and pick just the name, right? I don't this is going to be a base BO, so I'm really not going to be creating records for it other than for doing testing. But let's say that I was going to create records at sports, so let's just say it's going to be names of sports, right? Well, I wouldn't want to have two different, basketballs or footballs or whatever. Yeah. So if I go ahead and I were to select the name field, so here, if when I click on this, the drop down, right, these are the labels, right, the field labels of the fields that are on my business object that I get to select from. So I'm going to select name, right? So this just kind of shows you part of the importance of why you want to have uniquely named labeled fields. You don't want to have fields with the same label because when you get here and you're selecting in different, tools within the system and it's just showing you the label, you don't know which one's which, right? And there's no real easy way to tell which one's which other than trial and error until you get the right one, right? And that's not really a good way to, do your development just by, Easter egging. So I'm going to select the name. So if that single field is sufficient to identify uniqueness on my records, well then I'm finished with the published name. Sometimes it's not, right? So again, the published name this is what makes a record unique. Well, one thing that happens a lot of times is the control number, right? That's a unique number. It gets assigned every time, right? So if I put the control number in my published name, my my record will always be unique, right? Because the control number is always different. There are drawbacks, however, to putting the control number into the published name. So for the long-standing or long-time TRIRIGA developers, right? They'll know that, oh, hey, data integrator is a tool that we can use to, to create data in TRIRIGA, right? We can create records. So we can either create new records or we can also use it to update values of fields of existing records. Well, if you use the control number in the published name, you will not be able to update those records with Data Integrator, which isn't a big problem, especially not anymore now that we have other, methods of creating records. We've got the integration object, we got, OSLC. We've got ways of creating records within TRIRIGA rather than just a data integrator. But it's probably good to be aware of and try to avoid using the control number if at all possible, right? If you do have a situation where, what, I want to be able to have, multiple instances of the same named record in this case. So maybe I did change my mind and I say, oh, you know what, I want I want to have multiple football records, right? Because there's the NFL football, there's the Canadian Football League, there's arena football, there's college football, right? So I might need to have more than one record with the name football in it. And so I need something else that's going to help differentiate what makes that record unique. So, I could use the description field, right? and put in the description whether that's the NFL football or Canadian Football League or college football, whatever, right? And I can add that description field to my properties, right? My BO name, my published name. And as long as those things are unique, then that's great. That works for me, right? Or I could do the control number because then again, each record I create is going to be unique, but then I could end up creating multiple ones. So you just have to figure out what that proper balance is. The thing you want to be aware of here, and this was something that I was not aware of previously until I did the research to do this particular video. But the published name, although you can have 1,000 characters, right? Which if you use a description field, right, that's kind of the default size for the description field nowadays is 1,000 characters. So the name and the description, you can have all that in the publishing. Well, the platform, however, it's only going to look at the first 100 characters. And so if the first 100 characters of those two things are an exact match, then the platform's going to it's going to give you an error message saying, hey, you've got a duplicate value here. You can't create it, even though it's technically different. But because those first 100 characters are the same, then the platform is going to treat the whole thing as the same, and it's going to give you an error and prevent you from creating that other record with that same value. So you want to keep this small, right? Because the place that this published name goes to is you're going to see it in your browser, right? In the header of the browser, it's going to have the published name information for that record there. The record name system field, right? It's going to get populated with that data. Also, there's the IBS spec table, which is a table in the database that gets an entry for every record in the system. It's the spec name will will have that value too. Now, if you are adding multiple fields, so I'm going to go ahead and add the control number, and then we'll remove it. But so if you're adding multiple fields, you want to click on this add action, and then you have the choice of a delimiter that's going to separate the different parts of your published name. Now, you can only use one of these values, right? So there's a hyphen with no spaces, so there's no spaces around it. Everything will butt up together, and then you also have a hyphen with the space. These are probably the two most common that I see, but there's period, there's comma, right? Or just you can use a space. I'm going to select the hyphen with the space because that's the one I almost always select. I like the little bit of extra white space in there. I think it makes it a little bit easier to read because there's more of a visual break for you of the different sections of the name. Now, once we've selected that, we're able to select our delimiter, and then we've got this find action. So we can click on the find action, and we can go in again and add in what that next part of the name is, and we'll click OK. So if I look at this now, I can see that my published name would be the name with a space hyphen space, and then followed by the control number, right? And so the control number would ensure that the name is always unique, no matter what, because the control number is always unique. And as I've mentioned, right, there are drawbacks to using the control number. So I don't really need the control number. I don't need to kind of enforce that uniqueness. Sometimes for things like, let's say DTOs and you're loading them with integration object, right? And well, you might have to load uh, and update the same set of records over and over and over. So you don't care if there's duplicate values, right? You're only ever dealing with the most recent stuff, right? The control number is perfect for something like that. You can go ahead and use it. So it's not don't ever use the control number. It's just if you don't absolutely need it, it's probably best not to put it there because then that gives you the greatest flexibility in the future as far as what tools you use to update the records. So I'll do a future video on data integrator and probably integration object and some of the other stuff too. So that's all kind of beyond the scope right now. So let's go ahead and get rid of the control number. I decide, what, I don't want the control number, so I'll select delete. It deletes that field. from here, and then also removed, right, the delimiter. So that's great. That's the most common thing. This is the must-have in order to publish my BO. Um, Now, the second most common part of the BO mappings that you're going to set, it has to deal with that control number and the uniqueness of that control number. So we do have the ability to add a prefix to the control number. So let's say that I wanted every record to start off with, my initials, right? I can set it to constant value. I can put my initials in here, right? And it's going to have a prefix of MDJ, and then, well, in this case, it would be, the start with is one, right? So we're going to change this, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, right? Well, I can do the same thing. I can add a suffix, right? Now, you can do this. I think I've used the prefix once in 13 years, so it's not something that, it's going to be that common to to be done. But again, it really depends on the customers you work on, the environment you work on, and what's being implemented in the system, right? So the other thing that we generally do is we actually will change the starts with from 1 to a million. And what this does for us is, because the control number is really text, and will get sorted as text. So if I start at 1, for my first 9 records, I've got no problem. That's going to sort in the sort order, for text as well as numeric is the same. The problem would hit when I got to my 10th record, right? Because it's text. If the number 10, well, 1 comes before 2. So in the sorting, I would have record 1 and then record 1, 0, which is 10, right? And then record 2, right? Instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9, and then 10. So what we do kind of by convention is we usually set this at a million, and that will basically ensure that the first million records that we create will get sorted uh, correctly, by their control number. Now, depending on the amount of data that you envision being created for whatever your object is, maybe the million isn't enough. Go ahead and, hey, take it to a billion. So we have that. So this part and the name, those are the two things that you're pretty much always going to set, right? The prefix and suffix, not so much, although you can. And then you have a delimiter, right, which is going to be used for separating your prefix, the number, and the suffix, right? So there is one other little wrinkle that we can do here with the control number. So this checkbox here, where it's based off a prefix, will make the number increment. Um, it'll remember for each prefix that's used what the last number was, and then increment it. I don't know. So let's say an example. You say you have like a purchase order and purchase order line items, right? Let's say we were creating a purchase order line item, BO, right? We don't need to because there's already one in the system, but let's say we were. Well, then what I may want to do is I may want to have my prefix be whatever the ID of the purchase order is, right? So I can have my purchase order ID and then, dot one, dot two, dot three, dot four, dot five, whatever it is for that line item, rather than, so if I created one purchase order, right, and let's say I've had the 5 line items. Well, then I create another purchase order, and I'm going to add line items, so I start creating new line items. I don't want the line items to start at 6, right? It's going to be the first line item for that purchase order. I want it to start back over at 1. And that's what this based off of prefix does, right? So it causes the incrementing of the number to be based off of the uniqueness, right? The prefix with the whatever the last number was for that prefix, then the next number, right? If you're not using a prefix, then you don't need to select it, or if there's not going to be a value like, where I put the constant value MDJ, right? that meant that the prefix would always be MGDJ, would never be different. So it'd be kind of, silly to set it to be based off a prefix because it already is based off a prefix because everything's going to have the same prefix. All right, so that's the first two most important parts of our published name. The next part here is cost, quantity, and image, and these deal with the um, classification rollups. So I'm not really going to talk too much about the rollups. Maybe in a future video we can we can talk about rollups. And in TRIRIGA, we've got two different types of rollups. We've got classification rollups. We've got financial rollups. And what a rollup really allows you to do is it's for use in a hierarchy module, and you got hierarchy objects, right? And it allows you basically to roll up or sum up the values of that field on the child records underneath it, right? Now, roll-ups aren't formulas, so they aren't something that automatically calculate and update whenever there's a change to that value in the child record. So roll-ups are controlled. So when you have the roll-ups enabled, there's an action that you trigger that takes that value, right, and rolls it up and pushes that up to the parent record, right? Well, that action can be triggered by workflow, and that's usually how it is triggered. And so usually you do this like one step at a time, right? You start with your low level, and then you push it to the next level, and then the next level, and the next level in your hierarchy. That way, the records at the top of the hierarchy are accurate, and they're not the old stale values from when they're before there was a change. So that's kind of what rollups are in in a nutshell. So I'm not gonna, again, I'm not going to go into those too much, but what we have the ability to do is to specify. So usually with like a hierarchy, um, if it's the same kind of object, right? Then I might have a number field, right? Like try quantity in you or CST quantity in you, right? A quantity. Let's say I've got a quantity field on my object, and so then each time I create a child object, I set a quantity for it. And well, let's say I want that quantity to roll up. Well, I can select right that quantity value, and so we do have cost and quantity. And so even though these are called cost and quantity, you can actually use them for whatever you want. It does not necessarily have to be a quantity value or a cost value. But what this cost section does for us too is, with a hierarchy, you do have the ability to have different record types. So for instance, like in the location hierarchy, right? I can have a building, under a property, right? I can have a building under land, right? I can have you've got different record types that you can create, right? I'm not creating properties under properties, right? So and on these different record types, you might have a field that's named different than what's on your field that you need to be able to calculate and pull up, right? So if you've got multiple record types, well, you can select that number field, what it's going to, what the name of it is for each of those different record types, right? And you can roll it up. Now you can see you can do simple. This really is kind of like a simple formula, right? Where you can just do your addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, right? Those are your only choices, right? So these find actions will only allow you to select a number field. Well, in this case, on this business object, I really only have one number field if I look over here, right? So if I try to select something else, I can't, right? Now, if I have a smart section, I've got a number field in it, right? I would be able to change the section and the number. So these find actions, they limit you to the number fields. So I'd have to, select it and put on this particular BO the different named fields for what would also be on the child, and then I can select them here. Same sort of thing with the quantity, right? I can select the field here that I want to be used for rolling up the quantity. And then again, I can only select the number. I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel here because I don't want to actually set a value at this time. So again, these fields, right? This really just gives you kind of a simple formula, and this gives you a quantity, right? You don't have to necessarily use them for those purposes. However, then when you go and create your classification roll-up, then you need to tie that to, whatever the proper value of the cost or the quantity by specifying, the classification as a roll-up source, and then selecting either cost or quantity as the roll-up type. And so again, this is strictly for the classification rollups. The image in the user guide is under the cost and quantity of that classification rollup section, um, but it's really kind of ambiguous about what it does. It just says, it's an image that's used for records in a link, and so I'm not sure what the link is. Again, it's not something that I've used, but the image drop down. If you look right now, I can't select anything, and the reason for that is because I can only select an image field, and I don't have an image field added to my business object, so there's no field that meets the criteria, and that's why I can't select anything. Okay, so that's the classification rollup portion of our BO mapping. And now the conversion group, so currency conversions, right? We have the ability to do currency conversions in TRIRIGA. So the platform can perform, automatic currency conversions for base currency fields, and that's really what these conversion fields are for. Um, and also for the results of a formula. So to convert currencies, right, the platform, it has to have a conversion rate that's in the currency conversion manager, right? That's a prerequisite. And so in order to select a conversion rate, the platform needs to know um, more than just the currency it's converting to and from, right? It also needs the name of of a conversion group and a date. Now, I'm not really going to define what a conversion group is and get into all those details. In a future video on currency conversions, we'll cover it. But again, this isn't something that you necessarily may use much. It's just going to depend on if the implementation you're using, you're dealing with currency conversions or not. So you provide the conversion group and the date information here. So this conversion group, as you can see, right, I can't select anything here because for this particular field, the conversion group, it points to a list, right? So I have to have a list field. So I would actually need to go and create a list field, and then I would have to point it to a list that was a list of the conversion groups. Right, so I'd actually have to go and create that list first, and then I could point my field to it. Now the exchange date, um, this one also isn't letting me select anything because it only points to a date field or a date and time field. Now I have a duration field, but that's not the same as a date field or a date and time field. So that's why I can't select any of those values here, right? So what happens if I don't specify a value here? Well, if you don't specify a value for the conversion group or the exchange date, then the system will automatically use the default conversion group, and then it will use the date time that the record was created, or I'm sorry, that the record is saved, right? So modified, um, as the exchange date. So if you need to, for whatever reason, specify a specific date that all the conversions are going to be based off of, for this, then this is where you would set it, would be here. Again, right, in my 13 years, this really isn't something that I've used, but these are all the properties of the BO mapping. The most important thing, right, the published name, that's what defines a record as unique. I have to have that set. Without setting it, I cannot publish my business object. So now that I've got my published name is set, I've got my start with set to the first million records, so those order. I'm going to head and click Save Mapping. So I'm going to I just want to verify that it's there. So I'm going to come back here underneath the object browser, re-click on my BO so it opens up the properties for the BO, and then I'm going to go back to Tools, go back to BO Mapping, and just verify, okay, yep, it did save, everything is there. I'm going to go ahead and publish now. So again, I need to go out of that window. And so unfortunately, if I just close the mappings window, the BO properties window doesn't show. So I need to come back and click on my BIOS of the property. So I can see now, right, that it's read only. I can't edit it, right? I can see here that it says published. Also the revised BO is what's linked, right? The published BO isn't linked, right? These are all the visual indicators that tell me that the BO is published. Now, if I had done that and it said pending publication, right, and it kind of stayed there for a bit, then that would be a clue to me that, hey, I probably don't have my BO publish agent on my server, right, which actually happens quite frequently since this is just a VM that I stand up um, to research and stuff in. I don't always set the agents to run automatically on startup. But if you see, the publish pending for a long time, that's what's going on, right? Go and look, and then if you see the publish agent is actually started and it's running and it still hasn't published, sometimes you just need to cycle that agent, stop it, and restart it, and then it should publish. I've seen that happen. Sometimes where even though the BO publish agent says it's running, it's not really working and doing its job. So now that I've saved it, right, I've got my modified by and date and my revision number and stuff all here. My object label shows that it's in progress. So at this point, I would actually be able to go and assign an object label to my business object, right? I would give it a custom object label, kind of following off of IBM standard. Uh, so it would not be IBM prefix, so that would indicate that it's custom. And then, I would want to keep my object labeled so that when I see in progress, I know somebody's working on it, right? So if I finish all my development and I give my object a label, and then when I export it with the OM tool, it'll have that label, and then it also tells other developers who might be working in the system that, hey, this object is not it's not being developed currently by another developer, right? So if it did say in progress, and I like, well, I need to make some changes to this object, well, I'm going to look and see, okay, it's in progress. Who modified this last? I'm going to go talk to them and find out, okay, are you still working on this object? Are you finished? Why not? So that, we're not trying to work on the object at the same time because, he who saves last wins, right? So if you're dealing with things like the BOs, the state family and whatnot, that can be problematic. So it's a really good indicator and can help you from having cross conflict with other developers. So that concludes my lesson on BO development. Now we will do a little bit more further. There'll be other stuff on BO. I do plan on creating some other business objects in this module, showing you how the base business object acts as a template and things get inherited. But before I do that kind of stuff, I need to move on to actually the form development so that I can create a form for this record, so that I can create a record for this object, and so that I can properly unit test my work, right? I need to create a record and I need to transition it through every state transition, and I need to validate that my status, my previous status values are being set correctly, right? So I've got to exercise all those paths, right, as proper unit testing, right? You don't want to just do a single pass development and then toss it over to UAT, right? Always test your own work um, first, the best that you can, right? So that you catch some of that stuff. The other thing that I want to do too at some point, like in some of the next BOs, I want to have some custom classifications that I want to create, which means I'm going to need to create a classification BO and form. And so I want to model that for you first for a regular business object, and then I'll do a separate video for just the classification. It's basically the same. There is a difference in that you have to set the includes, and that kind of defines and tells the system what type of records can be created at that level in the hierarchy. So there are just a few differences. So it seems a little overwhelming and a lot to learn at first, but if you understand the general concepts of how to create a business object, it all those same requirements are there with a classification business object or any other hierarchy of it. You just also have to take care of the hierarchy portion, right? And that's something you don't do in the regular business object. So next set of videos will be on the forms. We'll go through the form. Uh, we'll go through all the form development so that we can get to the point to do some unit testing. So thank you for your time and watching these videos. I hope they've been helpful to you. I've actually learned some things by going through it, like I mentioned earlier, right? The 100 character limit on the published name I did not know before today. So always good to keep learning and getting better and perfecting your craft. I highly recommend that you do spend time, getting better. And then also the other thing is, understanding the why. It's probably the most important thing, right? Don't just do blind development. Somebody hands you a sheet and you just build off it, right? Understanding what you're developing, why you're developing it, um, so you can put yourself into the role of the user that's going to be using the system, right? And that can help you do better development, right? You can see things and say, wait a minute, this is this is a terrible process. I got to do 13 clicks to get to this one thing, right? If I was doing the development, or if I was having to enter in that and go that process, it would drive me crazy. How can I make this process easier and smoother, right? It's all about having that ultimately that end user, customer experience, going well. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Please do like and subscribe to the channel. It's really the primarily way that I have of seeing if you find these videos are useful or not. Whether I should continue to develop these videos or not, because right now it is just, it's solely a labor of love that I do on my own time. Um, I'm not compensated, in any way at this point in time for them. No sponsors, nothing like that yet. So, your comments, your feedback, are appreciated. Also, if you are an expert in certain areas of TRIRIGA and you would like to, do a video to help contribute to the community and teach people, the best practices and proper development for that area, reach out to me and let me know. So if you're, a budding video editor and love doing all that sorts of stuff, and you'd like to help out the channel, that would be great too, because it certainly is not my area of expertise, as you all see. I sit down, I do a single pass in creating these videos and upload them. So I'm sure they could be cleaned up a bit. So again, this concludes the BO development section. We'll start on forms next. Thank you for your time.